be agreed to.
Speaker.
Meka Waiteri.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker, i ngā mema o te whare nei, tēnā tātou katoa. Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to rise and lead the Labour contribution in supporting the second reading of the Hawke's Bay Regional Planning Committee Bill. Mr Speaker, can I first just pause to acknowledge ngā mate o te haukainga, Repa Hawaikirangi, Auntie June Tumona, kua wihi atu I te pō, haere atu rā. Mr Speaker, in endorsing this bill, I too want to acknowledge the work of the Māori Affairs Select Committee for doing their due diligence over what is a vital piece of legislation for the wider Hawke's Bay region. It does celebrate the fact that we have hapu iwi representatives at the table with the Hawke's Bay Regional Council to what I hope is going to be an enduring relationship in overseeing the protection and development of our natural resources. And many of those natural resources do we have in the Hawke's Bay, Mr Speaker. For me, this bill talks about and legislates a co-governance arrangement. Like the Minister has acknowledged, its origins has come from the Ngāti Pāhawera Treaty Settlement and also endorsed by the Manga Haruru Tangitu Deed of Settlement. Mr Speaker, it's important though that I do take some time to acknowledge the submitters. Quite rightly, as the Minister said, wholeheartedly of the 8 that made submissions, 6 clearly did support it. But I want to go on record just to acknowledge, because often what's said at Select Committee, particularly for our whānau at home, Mr Speaker, that don't get the opportunity to either attend the Select Committees, I think it's important that we acknowledge the contribution made by submitters to the Select Committee. Once I find the piece of paper. Isn't that always the case, Mr Speaker? But we had Ngāti Pāhawera, obviously represented by Toro Waka, endorsing the bill. Manga Haruru by Tania Hoffman, endorsing the bill. Okay. I do want to acknowledge that Te Tira Whakaimi, headed by Tamati Olsen, endorsed the bill but wanted to keep the door open to ensure their own co-governance arrangements, particularly around the resource management or their natural resources, is still open, given that they haven't completed their negotiations. The other submitters, clearly Hawke's Bay Regional Council sees the value in it. The one that I did read, Mr Speaker, that endorses it, and I want to acknowledge my first contribution to the reading around representation and about skills and capability. The Ngāti Kaungunu Iwi Incorporated chairperson also submitted to the Select Committee. I note that the submission was discussed by the Select Committee. The officials have come back and noted the concerns that Ngāhiwi put to the Select Committee, namely around representation, the coverage of this legislation in terms of the Hawke's Bay boundary, and also to ensure that there is adequate resourcing for specialist advice. This arrangement is not a new arrangement, Mr Speaker. We have precedents, particularly around the Tainui, Waikato Tainui River Accord that gives the legislative power to make decisions over the Waikato River. But it's also quite a costly exercise to ensure that your governance over precious natural resources are fulfilled, Mr Speaker. And so, in reading the submission proffered by Ngāhiwi Tumona on behalf of Ngāti Kaungunu, he does raise and did offer some amendments, particularly around the provision of specialist advice. I know the Select Committee has considered that, and perhaps the contribution from the Chair will give us some comfort that that specialist advice will be provided. We all know that overseeing natural resources, the technicality that is required around that, we want to ensure that independent advice, particularly to the hapu and iwi representations on that committee, are fulfilled. Our people have huge expectations of our folk when they are on those particular committees, Mr Speaker, and I want to ensure that those representatives at the table with the Hawke's Bay Regional Council are fulfilling that expectations. And so I note it's been dismissed, but I also have read that approximately $100,000 have been put aside for the co-governance arrangements. Can I just make the comment that in my previous role, in terms of engaging specialist advice to do an economic analysis of the 9 rivers throughout the Kahungunu Rohe, I tell you what, you wouldn't have got much change from $100,000. And I just say that, Mr Speaker, because specialist advice isn't cheap. And so my point around ensuring that specialist advice is available to this committee, you know, I encourage the Hawke's Bay Regional Council to resource it adequately, and that specialist advice is available to them. The other point I made, Mr Speaker, my first contribution to this bill was around representation and the rohe of Kahungunu. The rohe of Kahungunu extends from Paretu in the north, which is just north of Mahia, right down to Turakirai, which is the very southern coast of the Wairarapa. In noting that we have 9 representatives at this table from iwi, hapu, tangata whenua, I noted that we have 2 non-kahungunu iwi representatives at the table. Now, I know maybe, Mr Speaker, where you come from, everybody gets on well, but when you have a situation when one particular iwi may have a say over the management or natural resources on another iwi, that's going to lead to some contention, as I'm sure you will know. So, yes, we all know that. And I note that in a lot of the supporters of this bill, the paramount tino rangatiratanga of hapu and iwi over their lands, their waterways, is paramount. But here we have a particular situation that when an issue pertaining to the heart of Ngāti Kahungunu, we have both a tūhoi representative and we also have a tūwhare tō representative at the table. And look, all I want to do, Mr Speaker, is to raise this as a cautionary note to the committee that when they are sitting, that is well managed. The last thing we want here, Mr Speaker, is for this bill to unravel when it comes to implementation. So I do make that note, Mr Speaker, and encourage the committee to work a way to ensure that mana whenua, which is the basis in which this is derived from, is exercised to its fullest extent. Mr Speaker, when I heard about this bill passing through, I do want to commend, like I said, all the Select Committee members, to the participants through this process, which has been, I understand, happening for the last 5 years, to marry out and to iron out those implementation challenges. Hawke's Bay has some clear challenges coming upon it, particularly around natural resources. I want to note all the contributors to this reading of this bill that have gone on before me, Mr Speaker. I gladly stand again and support the second reading of the Hawke's Bay Regional Planning Committee. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora.